Somewhere right now, someone is walking into a room, and every person there feels it the second they arrive. No one raised their voice. No one announced an achievement. No one tried to prove anything to anyone. And yet, without a single loud word, that person has the full attention and respect of everyone around them. Have you ever wondered why that happens? Why some people seem to command respect without ever asking for it, while others chase approval their whole lives and never quite catch it? This audiobook is going to answer that question, and the answer might surprise you. The most respected people you have ever met were probably not the loudest ones in the room. They were the steadiest. They were not trying to impress you. They were simply being fully, honestly themselves, and something about that honesty made you want to listen. Over the next 10 chapters, you are going to learn exactly how this kind of quiet, unshakable respect is built, step by step, choice by choice, day by day. You will learn why confidence built for an audience always breaks eventually, and why confidence built in private moments never does. You will learn how to listen in a way that makes people trust you completely, how to stay calm when everything around you is falling apart, and how to build a version of yourself so solid that convincing anyone of your worth simply becomes unnecessary. If you are ready to stop performing and start becoming, keep listening. This is where it begins. Chapter 1. Discover why true power never needs loud announcements. There is a kind of person who walks into a room and changes nothing about how they sit, how they speak, or how much space they take up, and yet everyone in that room feels their presence. You have met someone like this before. Maybe it was a grandparent, a coach, a quiet manager at a job you once had, or a stranger you passed only once but never forgot. They did not raise their voice. They did not brag about what they had accomplished. They did not perform confidence like an actor reciting lines. And still, something about them commanded attention without asking for it. This is the beginning of understanding invisible authority, and it starts with a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Real power has never needed an audience. From the earliest years of our lives, we are taught the opposite. We are taught that being seen is the same as being valued. We are taught that if we do not announce our achievements, no one will know we accomplished anything at all. We learn to perform for approval before we even understand what approval means. A child raises a hand in class, not because they know the answer, but because they want to be noticed. An employee copies their boss on an email not because it is necessary, but because they want credit to be visible. A person posts about their workout, their new job, their vacation, not purely to share joy, but to be validated by likes, comments, and reactions. None of this makes anyone a bad person. It makes them human. But it also reveals a deep confusion between visibility and value, between noise and worth. Here is the truth that this chapter will teach you, and it is a truth that will change how you carry yourself for the rest of your life, if you let it sink in deeply enough. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful one. Loudness is often a mask for insecurity. When someone constantly needs to prove themselves, constantly needs to remind others of their achievements, constantly needs external recognition to feel like they matter, what they are really telling you is that they do not yet believe in their own worth. Confidence that requires an audience is not confidence at all. It is a performance, and performances end the moment the curtain falls and no one is watching. Think about water for a moment, not as a metaphor to admire, but as a simple observation of how the world works. A quiet river carves through solid rock over centuries, not because it screamed or forced its way through, but because it kept moving, consistently, patiently, without demanding recognition for its work. No one applauds the river each day for cutting through stone. It does not need applause, it simply continues, and one day, the canyon exists because of what it did without ever announcing itself. This is exactly how real strength operates in a person's life. It does not need daily proof. It does not need constant validation. It simply continues to act, day after day, and eventually the results speak in a way that no announcement ever could. Now let's talk about why loud announcements fail to build lasting respect. because understanding the failure is just as important as understanding the alternative. When you constantly announce your value to others, you are asking them to believe something rather than see it for themselves. Belief that is asked for is fragile. Belief that is observed is solid. If I tell you I am disciplined every single day, you might begin to doubt me, because true discipline rarely needs to be spoken about this much. But if you watch me wake up early consistently, keep my promises consistently, and remain calm under pressure consistently, you will believe it without me ever saying a word. The difference between these two approaches is the difference between temporary impression and permanent respect. There is also a psychological cost to constantly seeking approval that most people never examine closely. Every time you perform for others instead of acting from your own internal standard, you hand a small piece of your power away. You start making decisions based on what will impress rather than what will actually help you grow. You choose the job that sounds good at dinner parties instead of the job that builds real skill. You buy the car that photographs well instead of the one that serves your life. You say yes to things you do not want to do because saying no might make you look less agreeable, less impressive, less liked. Slowly, without noticing it, your life becomes a performance directed by an audience you did not even choose, and the real you gets buried underneath a character built entirely for approval. This is where the shift begins, and it begins with a decision that most people are afraid to make, choosing to build your life and your character for yourself first, before you ever consider what others think of it. This does not mean becoming cold or disconnected from people. It means anchoring your sense of worth in something steadier than opinion, which changes constantly and means little in the long run. It means asking yourself a different question before you act. Instead of asking, "How will this make me look?" you start asking, "Is this the right thing to do?" regardless of who is watching. Let's bring this into something practical, because wisdom without action is just an interesting thought that changes nothing. Here is the first step toward building invisible authority in your own life. Practice doing good work when no one will ever find out you did it. This sounds small, but it is one of the most powerful exercises in self-respect you can build. Clean up a mess that isn't yours without telling anyone you did it. Help a coworker succeed without mentioning your role in it later. Keep a promise to yourself, like waking up early or finishing a task, even when there is no one to check whether you followed through. Each time you do this, you are sending a message to your own mind, and that message is simple. I do not need witnesses to know my own worth. Over time, this becomes the foundation your confidence stands on, and it is far more solid than anything built from applause. The second practical step is learning to sit with silence instead of filling it. Many people talk too much, not because they have so much to say, but because silence makes them uncomfortable. Silence feels like a void that must be filled with words, opinions, jokes, or stories about themselves. But the people who carry real presence understand something different. They understand that silence is not empty. Silence is powerful. When you speak less, your words carry more weight when you finally choose to use them. Practice this the next time you are in a conversation. Resist the urge to jump in immediately. Let a pause exist. Let the other person finish completely before you respond. You will notice something remarkable. People begin to lean in more, not less, because they sense that when you do speak, it will matter. The third step is releasing the habit of correcting every misunderstanding about yourself. This one is difficult, because our instinct is to defend our image the moment someone gets something wrong about us. Someone assumes you are less capable than you are, and every part of you wants to prove them wrong immediately. But here is what real strength does instead. It lets the results speak over time, rather than rushing to argue in the moment. You do not need to win every conversation about your own worth. You need to live in a way that makes the conversation unnecessary. This takes patience, and patience is exactly the muscle that invisible authority is built on. Now consider how this shows up in real-world situations you likely face often. In the workplace, the person who is constantly reminding everyone of their achievements often creates quiet resentment among co-workers, even if they receive short-term recognition from management. But the person who consistently delivers strong work, supports their team without needing credit, and remains steady under pressure, becomes the person others trust with real responsibility. Trust, not attention, is what leads to lasting influence. In relationships, the same principle applies. A partner who constantly needs reassurance, constant proof of love, constant validation, creates exhaustion in the relationship over time. But a partner who is secure in themselves, who does not need constant confirmation to feel valued, creates a sense of safety that draws people closer rather than pushing them into a role of constant performance. People are naturally drawn toward steadiness. They are naturally drained by neediness, even when they cannot articulate why. In leadership specifically, since this book speaks directly to the qualities of respected leaders, this principle becomes even more clear. Think about leaders who yell to be heard versus leaders who speak calmly and are heard anyway. A leader who needs to raise their voice to gain control of a room is often revealing that their authority is not fully respected, so they must force it through volume. A leader who can speak in a normal tone and still hold the full attention of a room has built something deeper, authority that exists independent of noise. This is not because they are more intelligent or more talented than the loud leader. It is because they have spent time building consistency, competence, and calm under pressure, and these qualities speak louder than any raised voice ever could. As you move through the rest of this book, I want you to hold on to one central idea from this chapter, because everything else builds from it. Stop trying to convince the world of your worth, and start building a life so consistent, so grounded, and so honest that convincing becomes unnecessary. This is not a passive approach. It requires more discipline than seeking approval ever did, because there will be moments when no one notices your effort, no one applauds your restraint, and no one sees the quiet strength it took to stay calm instead of proving a point. In those moments, you will be tempted to fall back into old patterns, to seek the comfort of being seen and praised. Resist that pull. Every time you choose substance over performance, you are laying another brick in a foundation that cannot be shaken by opinion, criticism, or the passing attention of others. The most respected leaders in history were rarely the loudest voices in the room. They were the steadiest ones. They did not need to remind people of their power because their actions had already proven it beyond question. This is available to you too, not as some distant ideal reserved for extraordinary people, but as a daily practice built through small, consistent choices. Choose the quiet work over the loud announcement. Choose the steady action over the desperate proof. Choose to become someone whose worth is felt before it is ever spoken, and you will discover a form of respect that no applause could ever replace. This is where invisible authority begins, and it begins the moment you decide that your own inner standard matters more than anyone else's outward approval. Chapter 2. Release the constant need for external validation forever. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone, usually more than once in a lifetime, when you do something good, something you are proud of, and no one notices. Maybe you worked late to fix a problem before anyone else even knew it existed, and when you mentioned it the next day, the response was a quick nod and nothing more. Maybe you made a difficult decision that protected your family or your team, and instead of thanks, you received silence. In that moment, something inside you deflates a little. You wonder if it was worth doing at all if no one saw it. This feeling, this quiet ache for recognition, is one of the most common and most limiting forces in human life, and this chapter is about learning to release it for good. External validation is the approval, praise, or recognition we receive from other people. It feels good when we get it, and that is not something to feel ashamed of. Human beings are wired for connection, and part of connection is being seen and appreciated by others. The problem is not that validation feels good. The problem is what happens when we start needing it in order to feel good about ourselves. When your sense of worth depends on someone else's opinion, you have handed control of your inner peace to people who may not even be paying attention. You have built your emotional foundation on ground that shifts constantly because people's moods change, their attention wanders, and their opinions are often shaped by things that have nothing to do with you at all. Consider how this plays out in daily life. You post something online and check back every few minutes to see how many people responded. You finish a project at work and feel a small sense of panic if your manager does not immediately praise it. You make a change in your appearance, your home, or your habits, and you find yourself waiting for someone to comment on it before you allow yourself to feel proud. Each of these moments seems small on its own, but stacked together over months and years, they form a pattern where your happiness rises and falls based on factors completely outside your control. This is an exhausting way to live, even if you have never named it directly. It creates a constant low hum of anxiety, a background tension that never fully goes away because the source of your peace keeps moving. Here is a truth that needs to be said plainly. Other people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you imagine they are. This is not meant to feel discouraging, it is meant to feel freeing. Most people are consumed by their own worries, their own goals, their own insecurities. The colleague you think is judging your work is likely worried about their own performance. The friend you think noticed your mistake at dinner probably forgot about it within the hour because they were busy thinking about something happening in their own life. When you understand this deeply, you begin to see how much energy you have been spending trying to manage an audience that was barely watching in the first place. So, how do you actually release this need? Not just understand it intellectually, but change it at the level of daily behavior. The first step is learning to notice the moment when you seek approval before you even realize you are doing it. This takes practice, because the habit runs deep and often hides behind reasonable-sounding thoughts. You might tell yourself you are simply sharing an update, but underneath that thought is a quiet hope for praise. You might tell yourself you are just asking for feedback, but underneath that request is a need for reassurance that you did something right. Start paying attention to these moments without judging yourself harshly for having them. Simply notice. Awareness is the first step toward change because you cannot release a pattern you have never fully seen. The second step is building the habit of private acknowledgement. This means learning to notice your own effort and progress without waiting for someone else to point it out first. At the end of each day, take a few quiet minutes to recognize something you did well, even if it was small, even if no one else saw it. This might feel awkward at first, almost like praising yourself is somehow wrong or arrogant. But there is a difference between arrogance and self-respect. Arrogance needs an audience to feel superior in front of. Self-respect needs no audience at all. It simply requires honesty with yourself about your own effort and growth. The third step involves changing how you respond when praise does not come. This is where real growth happens, because it is easy to feel calm and secure when people are complimenting you. The true test is what happens in the silence, when you do the work and nothing follows it, no comment, no recognition, no applause. In these moments, resist the urge to fish for compliments or to explain your effort in hopes that someone will finally acknowledge it. Instead, return to the private acknowledgement you practiced earlier. Remind yourself why you did the work in the first place. If the reason was simply to be praised, this will feel difficult at first. If the reason was rooted in your own values, in doing something because it needed to be done, or because it aligned with who you want to be, you will find that the absence of praise stings far less than it used to. Think about how this shows up in relationships specifically, because approval seeking often runs deepest here. Many people stay quiet about their true feelings, needs, or boundaries because they fear the other person's reaction. They agree to plans they do not want, accept treatment they do not deserve, or hide parts of themselves they think might not be accepted. This is external validation controlling a person's entire way of showing up in a relationship. Releasing this need does not mean becoming careless about how others feel. It means becoming honest first and allowing the relationship to be built on truth rather than performance. A connection built on your real self even if it costs you some approval in the short term, will always be stronger than a connection built on a version of you designed purely to be liked. There is also a practical exercise that can accelerate this release faster than almost anything else: deliberately doing something well and choosing not to tell anyone about it. This might be finishing a task early, helping someone quietly, or achieving a personal goal you have been working toward. Keep it to yourself for a full week. Notice how uncomfortable this feels if you have spent years needing recognition. Notice the urge to mention it in conversation just to see the reaction on someone's face. Resist that urge each time it appears. What you are training is not secrecy for its own sake, but the muscle of feeling complete without an audience. This single exercise, repeated over time, does more to loosen the grip of external validation than almost any other practice available to you. Releasing the need for approval does not mean you stop caring about people or stop valuing genuine connection and feedback. It means you stop depending on approval to determine your worth. There is a profound difference between wanting to be respected and needing to be validated in order to feel like you matter. The first is human and healthy. The second is a cage, one that keeps you small, cautious, and constantly performing for people whose opinions often shift with the wind. When you finally release this need, you gain something far more valuable than applause ever offered you. You gain the freedom to act from your own values, to make decisions rooted in what is right rather than what will be praised, and to walk through your days carrying a quiet, steady confidence that no comment section, no compliment, and no criticism can shake. This freedom is the true foundation that every remaining chapter in this book will continue to build upon. Chapter 3. Build unshakable confidence through silent, consistent daily actions. Confidence is one of the most misunderstood words in the entire human vocabulary. Most people believe confidence is something you feel first and then act from. They wait to feel confident before they speak up in a meeting, before they try something new, before they trust themselves with a difficult decision. But this gets the entire process backward, and understanding why will change how you build confidence for the rest of your life. Confidence is not a feeling that arrives and then produces action. Confidence is a result, built slowly, through the accumulation of small actions repeated so consistently that trust in yourself becomes unavoidable. Think about how trust works between two people. You do not trust someone because they told you they were trustworthy. You trust them because, over time, they showed up when they said they would, kept their word in small moments as well as large ones, and remained consistent even when it was inconvenient. Trust in yourself is built through the exact same process. Every time you tell yourself you will do something and then follow through, even in a small way, you are making a deposit into a private account of self-trust. Every time you say you will do something and then quit, cancel, or make an excuse, you are making a withdrawal. Confidence at its core is simply the running balance of that account. This is why confidence built from a single big achievement rarely lasts. Someone gives a great speech and feels confident that night, but the feeling fades within days because it was not backed by an ongoing pattern. Someone loses weight for a big event and feels confident temporarily, but if the daily habits do not continue, the confidence disappears along with the results. Real, lasting confidence is never built in one dramatic moment. It is built in the quiet, repeated, often boring actions that no one else sees and that rarely feel significant in the moment they happen. Consider the discipline of making your bed each morning. On its own, this seems like a minor task, hardly worth mentioning in a conversation about confidence. But look closer at what it actually builds. It is the first promise you make to yourself each day, completed before anyone else is even awake to notice. It requires no motivation, no mood, no external push. You simply do it because you said you would. Multiply this by hundreds of similar small actions across a week, a month, a year, and you begin to understand how unshakable confidence is actually constructed. It is not one large pillar. It is thousands of small bricks, laid one at a time, mostly when no one is watching and nothing dramatic is happening. The word silent matters deeply here, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. Silent does not mean secretive or hidden out of shame. It means these actions do not require an audience to have value. A person who only follows through on commitments when someone else is watching has not built confidence at all. They have built a performance that depends entirely on observation. True confidence continues exactly the same, whether a camera is on or the room is empty. This is the test that separates real self-trust from the kind that collapses the moment attention disappears. Now let's talk about how to actually build this in your own life, because understanding the principle is only useful if it changes your daily behavior. The first practical step is choosing one small commitment you can keep every single day, something so small that failure feels almost impossible. This might be drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning, writing 3 sentences in a journal, or taking a short walk. The size of the action matters less than the consistency of keeping it. Choose something small enough that willpower is never really tested, because the goal here is not the action itself. The goal is proving to yourself, day after day, that your word to yourself means something. The second step is tracking these commitments honestly, even if only in your own mind or on a simple piece of paper. This is not about creating pressure or turning your life into a checklist obsession. It is about creating evidence. When self-doubt creeps in, and it will, you need something real to point to. A mind full of vague intentions cannot fight off doubt effectively, but a mind that can recall 30 straight days of following through on a promise has something solid to stand on. This evidence becomes the quiet voice that speaks louder than fear when a difficult moment arrives. The third step is learning to separate outcomes from actions when measuring your progress. Many people damage their confidence by tying it entirely to results they cannot fully control. A salesperson ties their confidence to whether the client says yes. A writer ties their confidence to whether the book sells well. But results depend on many factors outside your control, including timing, other people's decisions, and circumstances you never chose. Confidence built only on outcomes will always be fragile, because outcomes are unpredictable by nature. Instead, measure yourself by whether you showed up and did the work you said you would do. The salesperson who prepares thoroughly and communicates honestly has succeeded regardless of the client's answer. The writer who sits down and writes each day has succeeded regardless of eventual sales numbers. When you measure yourself this way, your confidence becomes something steady, something you carry with you regardless of how any single day unfolds. There is a particular kind of strength that develops in people who keep promises to themselves that no one else knows about. Picture someone who commits to waking up 30 minutes earlier each day to think clearly before the noise of life begins. No one applauds this. No one even knows it is happening. But after several months, this person carries themselves differently. There is a settledness in how they speak, a steadiness in how they handle pressure, because they have quietly proven to themselves, morning after morning, that they can be relied upon. This is the deepest form of confidence available to any person, and it cannot be given to you by someone else's praise, nor can it be taken from you by someone else's criticism. Setbacks will happen along this path, and they deserve honest acknowledgement rather than avoidance. There will be mornings you skip the walk, days you forget the journal, weeks where life becomes chaotic and your small commitments fall apart entirely. This does not erase the confidence you have built, and it does not mean you must start completely over from nothing. What matters most is how quickly you return to the commitment after missing it. A single missed day handled with self-compassion and a quick return builds more resilience than a perfect streak that collapses under any interruption at all. The goal was never perfection. The goal was always the pattern of returning, again and again, to your own word. Over time, something shifts inside a person who practices this consistently. Situations that once felt intimidating start to feel manageable, not because the situations themselves changed, but because the person walking into them has changed. They carry a quiet certainty that does not depend on the reaction of the room. This certainty was not given to them by luck or personality. It was built, action by action, in the private moments where no one was watching and nothing seemed important enough to matter. And yet, in the end, those private moments turn out to matter more than almost anything else, because they are exactly where unshakable confidence is, quietly, patiently, and permanently built. Chapter 4. Master the art of listening before you speak. Most conversations are not actually conversations at all. They are two people taking turns speaking while quietly waiting for their chance to talk again. While one person shares a story, the other is not truly absorbing it. They are searching their own memory for a similar story to share once it becomes their turn. While one person explains a problem, the other is already forming advice before the explanation is even finished. This pattern is so common that most people never notice it happening, either in themselves or in others. And yet, this single habit, the habit of preparing your response instead of absorbing what is being said, quietly destroys trust, connection, and influence in almost every relationship it touches. Listening, real listening, is one of the rarest skills a person can develop, precisely because it requires something that goes against our natural instinct. Our instinct is to focus on ourselves, our own thoughts, our own need to be understood. Listening asks us to set that instinct aside temporarily and give our full attention to another person's words without immediately filtering them through our own experience or rushing to respond. This is uncomfortable at first, because silence while someone else speaks can feel like an empty space that must be filled. But that discomfort is exactly where the skill begins to develop, and pushing through it is what separates people who are truly heard from people who are simply present in the room. Consider what happens when someone finally feels truly listened to, perhaps for the first time in a long while. Their shoulders relax, their tone softens. They often say more than they originally intended to share, because the safety of being heard invites honesty. This is not a small thing. In a world full of distraction, where most people are scrolling, multitasking, or half present in every interaction, the simple act of giving someone your undivided attention has become rare enough to feel almost like a gift. People remember how you made them feel far longer than they remember what you said, and few things make a person feel more valued than being truly heard. There is also a strategic advantage to listening that many people overlook entirely. When you listen more than you speak, you gather information that speaking would never reveal to you. You learn what someone actually needs, not what you assume they need. You learn what is bothering them beneath the surface complaint they are voicing. You learn the details that allow you to respond with precision instead of generic advice that could apply to anyone. Leaders who master this skill make fewer mistakes in judging situations because they are working from real information rather than assumptions formed too quickly. Every time you speak before you fully understand a situation, you risk responding to a problem that does not actually exist, while missing the real one entirely. Let's talk about how to actually practice this skill, because like every principle in this book, understanding it means little without daily application. The first practice is learning to pause before responding, even for just 2 or 3 seconds after someone finishes speaking. This small pause does 2 things at once. It signals to the other person that you are truly considering what they said, rather than simply waiting for your turn, and it gives your own mind a moment to respond thoughtfully instead of reflexively. Most people fill silence immediately because silence feels uncomfortable, but that brief pause is often where the most thoughtful responses are born. The second practice is resisting the urge to relate everything back to yourself. When someone shares a struggle, the common reflex is to respond with a similar story from your own life, often with good intentions, hoping to show understanding through shared experience. But this frequently shifts the conversation's attention away from the person who needed to be heard and back onto you. Instead, practice asking a follow-up question that keeps the focus on their experience. Instead of saying, "That happened to me too, and here is what I did," try saying, "How did that make you feel?" or "What do you think caused that?" This keeps the space open for them to continue processing their own thoughts, and it demonstrates a form of attention that most people rarely receive. The third practice involves listening for what is not being said directly. Often, the real concern behind someone's words is hidden slightly beneath the surface. A person complaining about being busy at work might actually be expressing worry about not being valued. A friend venting about a minor disagreement might actually be dealing with a deeper insecurity in that relationship. Learning to notice tone, hesitation, and the emotion underneath the words takes practice, but it transforms your ability to respond in a way that actually addresses what someone needs, rather than only reacting to the surface content of their sentence. Silence itself deserves specific attention here, because many people misunderstand its role in conversation entirely. Silence is often treated as something awkward that must be avoided or filled quickly. But silence can be one of the most powerful tools available in any interaction. When you ask a meaningful question and then simply wait, without rushing to fill the space with your own thoughts, you create room for the other person to think more deeply and answer more honestly. Many people give their first response quickly because it feels expected. But if you allow the silence to continue a moment longer, a more thoughtful, more honest answer often follows. This applies in difficult conversations, in negotiations, in moments of conflict, and in ordinary daily interactions alike. Think about how this shows up specifically in leadership and influence, since this quality builds directly on everything discussed in earlier chapters. A leader who listens before speaking earns a particular kind of trust that a leader who talks constantly never manages to build. Employees, teammates, and family members alike can sense the difference between someone who is genuinely trying to understand them and someone who is simply waiting for an opportunity to share their own opinion. When people feel understood, they open up more honestly about problems, which allows those problems to be solved earlier, before they grow larger. When people feel unheard, they stop sharing important information altogether, often leading to bigger issues that surface much later, when they are far harder to fix. There is also a quieter, more personal benefit to mastering this skill, one that extends beyond how others perceive you. Listening deeply requires you to slow down, and in that slowing down, you become more present in your own life. You stop rushing through interactions the way you rush through emails or errands. You start noticing details in conversations that you would have missed entirely while mentally preparing your next comment. This presence changes not only how others experience you, but how you experience your own relationships, moment by moment, conversation by conversation. Mastering the art of listening before speaking is not about staying silent out of fear or holding back your own voice permanently. It is about earning the right to speak by first understanding fully what you are speaking into. When you finally do offer your thoughts, after truly listening, your words carry more weight because they are shaped by real understanding rather than assumption. This is precisely why the most respected people rarely rush to fill every silence with their own voice. They understand that listening first is not a weakness or a delay. It is where real influence quietly begins. Chapter 5. Develop presence that commands respect without demanding attention. Presence is one of those qualities everyone can recognize but almost no one can define. You feel it the moment someone steps into a room, even before they say a single word. It has nothing to do with height, appearance, or how expensive their clothes look. Two people can walk into the exact same meeting, and one barely registers while the other seems to shift the energy of the entire space, simply by existing within it. This chapter is about understanding what actually creates that shift, and more importantly, how you can build it deliberately in your own life, starting today. Presence is often confused with charisma, and while the two overlap, they are not the same thing. Charisma is often loud, magnetic, entertaining. Presence is quieter, steadier, and in many ways more powerful, because it does not fade once the entertainment stops. A charismatic person can fill a room with energy for an hour and leave people exhausted once they walk away. A person with true presence leaves people feeling calmer, more grounded, more at ease, simply from having been near them. This difference matters deeply, because the goal of this chapter is not to teach you how to perform for a crowd. It is to teach you how to become someone whose steadiness naturally draws respect, without ever needing to perform at all. The foundation of presence begins with something surprisingly physical: your relationship with your own body. Most people carry tension they are not even aware of. Shoulders creep up toward the ears. Breathing becomes shallow and quick. Movements become rushed, fidgety, unsettled. All of this communicates something to the people around you before you ever say a word. It communicates anxiety, urgency, a lack of internal steadiness. On the other hand, a person who breathes slowly, moves without rushing, and holds their body in a relaxed but upright posture communicates something entirely different, something that feels like calm control, even if that person is nervous on the inside. This is not about faking confidence. It is about learning to physically regulate yourself in a way that reflects the internal steadiness you are building through everything discussed in earlier chapters. Start with your breath, because it is the fastest and most accessible tool available to you in any moment. Before you walk into a meeting, a difficult conversation, or any situation where you want to show up grounded, take a few slow breaths, exhaling longer than you inhale. This single action calms the nervous system in a way that immediately affects how you carry yourself. People can sense tension even when it is not spoken. They can also sense calm even when it is not announced. Your breath is often the first thing shaping which one you are transmitting into a room. Next, pay attention to your pace, in both movement and speech. Rushed movement signals urgency and, often unintentionally, a lack of control. Rushed speech, filled with filler words and quick corrections, signals uncertainty about what you are saying, even if the content itself is accurate. Practice slowing down deliberately, especially in moments when you feel the urge to speed up. When you answer a question, take a breath before responding, instead of answering instantly. When you walk into a room, resist the habit of rushing to your seat. These small adjustments, repeated consistently, begin to reshape how you are perceived, not through performance, but through a genuine shift in how you occupy space and time. Eye contact plays a significant role in presence as well, though it is often misunderstood. Some people believe intense, unbroken eye contact demonstrates confidence, but this often reads as aggressive or unnatural instead. True presence involves comfortable eye contact, holding it naturally during conversation without staring, and being equally comfortable looking away without feeling as though you have lost control of the interaction. This comfort comes from internal security rather than technique alone. When you are not anxious about how you are being perceived, your eye contact naturally settles into something steady and genuine, rather than forced or performative. Presence also requires emotional regulation, particularly in moments of conflict or pressure. Anyone can appear calm when life is easy. The real test comes when something goes wrong, when someone criticizes you unfairly, when a plan falls apart, or when tension rises in a room. People with real presence do not suppress their emotions entirely, nor do they pretend nothing affects them. Instead, they respond rather than react. There is a crucial difference between the two. Reacting is immediate, driven by whatever emotion arrives first, often regretted moments later. Responding involves a brief pause, even just a few seconds, that allows you to choose your words and actions deliberately, rather than being pulled along by the intensity of the moment. This pause is where presence lives most powerfully, because it demonstrates to everyone watching that you are not controlled by circumstances, even difficult ones. There is also a quieter dimension to presence that deserves attention, the energy you bring into spaces through your attention itself. When you are fully present with someone, not distracted by your phone, not mentally elsewhere, not glancing around the room for something more interesting, people feel it immediately. This kind of attention is rare enough today that it stands out powerfully whenever it is offered. Practice giving your complete attention in conversations, even brief ones. Put the phone away completely. Face the person speaking. Let your focus rest entirely on them for those few minutes. This single habit, practiced consistently, builds a form of presence that no amount of polished appearance or rehearsed confidence could ever replace. It is worth noting that presence is not about eliminating nervousness or pretending to feel calm when you do not. Even highly respected people feel nervous before important moments. The difference lies in what they do with that nervous energy. Instead of letting it spill outward into rushed words or restless movement, they channel it inward, using their breath and their pace to remain outwardly steady, even while internally, their heart might be racing. This skill develops with practice, and every situation where you consciously choose calm over urgency strengthens your ability to do it again the next time, until eventually, steadiness becomes your natural default rather than something you have to consciously build each time. As you continue developing this quality, you will notice something interesting happen in your interactions with others. People will begin seeking your opinion more often, not because you spoke more, but because when you did speak, it felt considered and grounded. People will feel more comfortable sharing difficult things with you, not because you demanded their trust, but because your presence created a sense of safety without asking for anything in return. This is the essence of presence that commands respect without demanding attention. It asks nothing from the room, and yet somehow it receives everything the room has to offer, simply by being fully, calmly, and steadily itself. Chapter 6. Strengthen your character when nobody else is watching. There is an old idea, simple but rarely lived out, that character is what you do when no one would ever find out either way. Not what you do in front of a boss, a partner, a crowd, or a camera. What you do in the empty room, in the parked car, in the private decision that only you will ever know about. This is the truest test of who a person actually is, because it removes every incentive except one, the simple desire to be someone you respect when you look in the mirror. Most people build two versions of themselves without even realizing it. There is the public version, careful, polished, aware of being observed, and there is the private version, the one that emerges when the observation disappears. For many people, these two versions are quite different from each other. The public version returns the extra change a cashier mistakenly gave them because someone is watching and honesty looks good. The private version might not think twice about keeping it because no one will ever know the difference. This gap between the public self and the private self is where character either grows strong or slowly erodes, and it happens in moments so small that most people never notice they are being tested at all. Consider a simple example. You find a wallet on the street with cash inside and no one around to see what you do next. The public version of most people would return it if a crowd were watching, motivated partly by the desire to be seen as good. But alone, with certainty that no one will ever find out, the decision becomes a pure reflection of internal values rather than external pressure. This is not a dramatic, life-altering moment, and yet it reveals something significant. Character is not built in the rare, obvious tests of morality that come once or twice in a lifetime. It is built in these small, forgettable moments that happen constantly, moments most people walk past without a second thought. Why does this matter so deeply for someone trying to build quiet, lasting respect and influence in their life? Because people, whether consciously or not, can sense inconsistency between someone's public behavior and their private choices, even without ever witnessing the private moments directly. Inconsistent character eventually shows itself through small cracks, a promise broken when convenient, a shortcut taken when no one would notice, a lie told when the truth felt inconvenient. Over time, these cracks accumulate into something people feel even if they cannot explain exactly why. On the other hand, a person whose private choices match their public behavior develops a kind of solidness that others sense intuitively, even without direct evidence. This solidness is the invisible foundation beneath every form of authority discussed throughout this book. Let's talk about how to actually strengthen character in the moments when no one is watching, because this is a practice, not simply a personality trait some people are born with and others are not. The first practice is developing an internal witness, a habit of noticing your own choices as if someone trustworthy were quietly observing, even when no one actually is. This is not about creating guilt or paranoia. It is about staying honest with yourself, refusing to let the absence of an audience change your standards. When you catch yourself thinking, "No one will know," treat that exact thought as a signal, a moment worth paying closer attention to, rather than a convenient excuse. The second practice is keeping promises made only to yourself, especially small ones that carry no external consequence if broken. This builds directly on ideas explored earlier in this book, but here the focus shifts specifically to moral consistency rather than confidence alone. If you tell yourself you will not check your phone during a moment meant for focus, and no one would ever know if you did, following through on that private promise strengthens the same internal muscle that eventually shows up in larger, more visible decisions. Character is not built suddenly in a single dramatic moral test. It is built through hundreds of small private tests that most people never even recognize as tests at all. The third practice involves examining your motives honestly when you do something good. Ask yourself a simple but revealing question. Would I still do this if no one ever found out? If the honest answer is no, this does not necessarily make you a bad person, but it does reveal where your action was rooted in image rather than value. This is not about eliminating every action that involves being seen, since plenty of good actions naturally happen in public settings. It is about noticing when the visibility itself becomes the primary motivation, because actions motivated purely by image tend to disappear the moment observation disappears, while actions rooted in genuine value continue regardless of who is watching. Think about how this plays out in leadership specifically, since character forms the quiet backbone beneath every quality discussed in this book so far. A leader who cuts corners privately while appearing disciplined publicly will eventually be discovered, whether through a single dramatic failure or a slow accumulation of small inconsistencies that erode trust over time. But a leader who maintains the same standards whether observed or not builds something that cannot be shaken by scrutiny, because there is nothing hidden that contradicts what is shown. This is precisely why the most respected leaders throughout history were rarely people obsessed with managing their public image. They were people whose private choices simply matched their public ones so closely that image management became unnecessary. There is also a deeply personal reward to this practice that goes beyond how others perceive you. A person who consistently strengthens their character in private moments develops a particular kind of peace that is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. It is the absence of a nagging internal tension, the freedom from constantly managing two different versions of yourself, the quiet relief of never worrying about being caught in a private inconsistency because there simply is not one to be caught in. This peace becomes a resource you can draw on during difficult moments, because you are not carrying the hidden weight of contradictions between who you appear to be and who you actually are. Setbacks will happen here too, and they deserve honesty rather than denial. There will be moments when the private choice you make does not align with the character you are trying to build, moments of shortcuts taken, promises broken, honesty avoided because it felt easier in that instant. This does not erase the character being built through other, better choices. What matters is returning to your standard immediately afterward, examining what led to the lapse, and choosing differently the next time a similar moment arrives. Character built through private consistency is not about achieving flawless perfection. It is about closing the gap, moment by moment, between the person you present to others and the person you actually are when the room is empty and no one else will ever know the difference. Chapter 7. Replace empty impressions with genuine, meaningful human connections. Picture two different versions of the same networking event. In the first version, a person moves quickly from group to group, handing out business cards, mentioning their job title within the first few sentences of every conversation, and glancing over shoulders to see who else might be worth talking to next. By the end of the night, they have met 40 people and remember almost none of them clearly, and almost none of them remember much about that person either, beyond a vague impression of someone in a hurry. In the second version, a person spends the entire evening talking to only 3 or 4 people, but each conversation goes deep. They ask real questions, listen to the answers, and leave each interaction having actually learned something true about the other person's life. When that second person leaves, they are remembered, not because they tried harder to be memorable, but because they were actually present for the people they spoke with. This is the difference between an impression and a connection, and understanding this difference will change how you approach every relationship in your life. An impression is something you leave behind quickly, often built on surface details: a firm handshake, a clever comment, an impressive title, a polished appearance. Impressions can open doors, but they rarely hold them open for long, because they are built on very little substance. A connection is something entirely different. It is built slowly, through genuine curiosity about another person, through vulnerability shared honestly, through attention given fully rather than partially. Connections do not just open doors, they build relationships that last through difficult seasons, disagreements, and the simple passage of time, because they were never dependent on performance in the first place. Many people spend enormous energy trying to be impressive, rather than trying to be genuinely present with others, and this energy is almost always misplaced. Think about the people you actually trust and feel closest to in your own life. It is rarely the person who seemed the most polished or accomplished when you first met them. It is usually the person who asked how you were actually doing and waited for a real answer, the person who remembered a small detail you mentioned once and brought it up again weeks later, the person who was honest about their own struggles, instead of only presenting a curated version of success. These small acts of genuine attention build trust far more effectively than any impressive resume or rehearsed charm ever could. The habit of trying to impress others often comes from the same root discussed earlier in this book: the need for external validation. When you are focused on impressing someone, your attention is actually on yourself, on how you are being perceived, rather than on the person standing in front of you. This creates a strange irony. The harder you try to impress someone, the less present you actually become in the conversation, and people can feel this absence even if they cannot name it directly. They sense that the conversation is somehow about you, even when you are asking them questions, because the questions feel more like a performance of interest than actual curiosity. Building genuine connection instead requires a shift in intention before the conversation even begins. Instead of walking into an interaction wondering how you can impress this person, walk in wondering what you might learn about them. This single shift changes everything about how you listen, what questions you ask, and how the other person experiences the conversation. Curiosity is deeply attractive to people, far more attractive than achievement, because curiosity communicates that you find them interesting exactly as they are, without needing them to be impressed by you in return. Practically, this means asking questions that go beneath the surface, even in casual settings. Instead of asking someone what they do for work and stopping there, ask what drew them to that path in the first place. Instead of asking how their weekend was and accepting a one-word answer, ask what was the best part of it, and actually wait for a real response. These questions take the conversation somewhere deeper than small talk usually goes, and most people respond to this kind of attention with visible relief, because so few conversations in daily life actually offer it. Vulnerability plays an important role in building real connection as well, though it must be offered with wisdom rather than recklessness. Sharing something true and slightly personal, a real challenge you are facing, a genuine uncertainty rather than only a success story, invites the other person to do the same. Connection rarely deepens when both people are only presenting their highlight reels to each other. It deepens when someone is willing to be a little honest first, creating a safe opening for the other person to be honest as well. This does not mean oversharing with strangers or burdening every conversation with heavy emotional weight. It means being willing to drop the polished performance occasionally, in favor of something more real. Another important practice involves following up after initial conversations, something most people forget to do simply because life gets busy. A message sent days later referencing something specific from an earlier conversation communicates that the person mattered beyond that single moment. This small effort separates genuine connection from a passing impression that fades within a day or two. Relationships are built through this kind of consistency over time, not through a single strong first meeting alone. The people who become truly trusted in your life are rarely the ones who impressed you once. They are the ones who continued showing up, checking in, and remembering the details that mattered to you long after the initial conversation ended. It is worth acknowledging that this approach requires more patience than simply trying to impress people quickly. Genuine connections take longer to build, and they cannot be rushed or forced through clever tricks or rehearsed charm. But what you gain through this patience is far more valuable than a room full of people who remember you vaguely as impressive. You gain a smaller circle of people who genuinely trust you, who feel safe being honest with you, and who remain present in your life through circumstances that fade the interest of anyone whose relationship with you was built only on impression. This is the quiet, lasting reward of choosing connection over performance, and it is available to anyone willing to slow down long enough to actually see the person standing in front of them. Chapter 8. Lead through calm actions instead of loud words. Picture a workplace where a serious problem suddenly emerges, a mistake that will cost time, money, and possibly a client's trust. In one version of this scene, the person in charge raises their voice, demands to know who is responsible, and fills the room with tension and blame before any solution has even been discussed. In another version, the person in charge takes a breath, asks calm questions to understand exactly what happened, and immediately begins directing attention toward what can be done next. Both people may care equally about the outcome. Both may feel the same internal stress in that moment. But only one of them is actually leading, because leadership is not measured by the volume of a reaction. It is measured by the clarity and steadiness of the response. This chapter is about a form of leadership that does not depend on noise to feel powerful. It is easy to mistake loudness for strength, because loud reactions often demand immediate attention, and attention can feel like control. But attention is not the same as respect, and demanding a reaction from people is not the same as inspiring genuine trust in them. When a leader relies on volume, urgency, or dramatic displays of emotion to move people into action, that leader is often creating short-term compliance built on fear or discomfort, rather than long-term respect built on trust. People might move quickly to avoid the loud leader's anger, but they rarely feel inspired by it, and they rarely bring their best thinking to a situation where the dominant emotion in the room is tension rather than focus. Calm action operates completely differently, and it is worth understanding exactly why it works so effectively. When a leader remains calm during a crisis, that calmness spreads through the room in a way that loud reactions never could. Human beings are highly responsive to the emotional tone set by whoever is perceived as being in charge. If that person appears panicked, others panic as well, and panic narrows thinking, making it harder to solve problems clearly. If that person remains steady, others borrow that steadiness, even if they were anxious moments before. This is not a small effect. It is one of the most powerful tools available to anyone in a position of influence, and it costs nothing except the discipline to manage your own reaction before it manages you. Consider how this plays out with a team that has just missed an important deadline. A leader who reacts loudly might say something like, "How could this happen? This is unacceptable. We cannot afford mistakes like this." The team hears blame, and their attention shifts toward self-protection, toward explaining or defending rather than solving. A leader who responds calmly might instead ask, "What happened here, and what do we need to do to get back on track?" The team hears a problem to solve rather than a verdict already decided, and their attention shifts toward action rather than defense. The outcome each leader is hoping for, a solved problem and a team that performs better next time, is far more likely to happen through the second approach, even though it involves far fewer dramatic words. This does not mean calm leadership avoids honesty or difficult conversations. In fact, calm leaders are often more direct than loud ones, because their directness does not need to be wrapped in emotional intensity to carry weight. A calm leader can say, clearly and without hesitation, "This result was not good enough, And here is exactly what needs to change, without raising their voice or letting frustration color every word. This kind of direct, calm honesty is often more effective than an emotional outburst because it is easier for people to actually hear and process. When someone is yelling, the listener's mind often focuses more on managing the emotional intensity of the moment than on absorbing the actual content of what is being said. Building this kind of calm leadership requires practice, particularly in learning to separate your immediate emotional reaction from your eventual response. The first practical step is creating space between the trigger and your reply. When something goes wrong and you feel the urge to respond immediately, pause, even if only for a few seconds. Take one slow breath before speaking. This brief pause interrupts the automatic reaction and gives you a moment to choose your words with intention, rather than letting frustration speak for you. Over time, this pause becomes a natural habit rather than a conscious effort, and it becomes one of the most valuable tools you carry into every difficult situation. The second practical step is preparing your language in advance for situations you know tend to trigger frustration. If certain types of mistakes or certain team members consistently test your patience, think ahead of time about how you want to respond when this happens again. Having a calm phrase ready, something like, "Let's figure out what happened and how to fix it," gives you something steady to fall back on in the heat of the moment, rather than improvising a reaction driven purely by emotion. The third practical step involves managing your own physical state before high-pressure conversations. Just as discussed in earlier chapters regarding presence, your breathing and posture directly affect your emotional state. Before entering a difficult meeting, take a few moments to breathe slowly and settle your body. This is not a small trick. It genuinely changes the chemistry of your response, making calm behavior significantly easier to access when it matters most. It is worth addressing directly that calm leadership is sometimes mistaken for weakness by people who have only ever experienced loud leadership. Some team members might initially test boundaries with a calm leader, assuming quiet means passive. This is where calm strength must be paired with clear consequences and firm follow-through. Calm does not mean permissive. A calm leader can hold firm boundaries, deliver serious consequences, and demand high standards, all without raising their voice, because their firmness comes from consistency rather than intensity. Over time, people learn that this leader's calm demeanor does not mean their expectations are soft. It means their control over the situation is complete enough that loudness was never necessary in the first place. The deepest form of respect in leadership is built by people who remain the same, whether the situation is calm or chaotic. When a crisis hits and the leader in the room does not spiral, does not panic, and does not need to raise their voice to regain control, something remarkable happens to everyone else present. They feel a floor beneath them, a sense that even though the situation is difficult, someone steady is guiding the response. This feeling of safety under pressure is worth more to a team's performance and loyalty than any motivational speech delivered with volume and passion. Calm actions, repeated consistently under pressure, build a form of trust that loud words, no matter how well-intentioned, could never achieve on their own. Chapter 9. Cultivate inner peace that radiates natural, quiet authority. There is a particular kind of person who seems untouched by the chaos happening around them, not because their life is easier than anyone else's, but because something inside them has settled into a place that circumstances cannot easily reach. You have likely felt the difference between being near someone who is anxious and being near someone who is at peace, even without either person saying a single word about how they feel. Anxiety spreads through a room like a draft under a door, tightening shoulders and quickening breath in everyone nearby. Peace spreads just as easily, though far more quietly, softening tension and inviting calm into spaces that might otherwise feel tense. This chapter is about understanding where that peace actually comes from and how you can build it deliberately, rather than waiting for life to become easy enough to feel calm on its own. Many people believe inner peace is something that arrives once external circumstances finally align, once the stressful job improves, once the difficult relationship gets easier, once enough money is saved, once enough success is achieved. But peace that depends entirely on circumstances is not really peace at all. It is simply the temporary absence of stress, waiting to be disrupted by the next difficulty that inevitably arrives, because difficulty is a permanent feature of life, not a temporary inconvenience to be eliminated. Real peace, the kind that radiates outward and creates the quiet authority described throughout this book, is built internally, independent of whether circumstances happen to be favorable in any given moment. This distinction matters enormously, because it changes where you look for peace in the first place. If you believe peace comes from circumstances, you will spend your entire life chasing conditions that never quite arrive, always slightly out of reach, always requiring one more achievement or one more resolved problem before you finally allow yourself to feel calm. If you understand that peace is built internally, through how you relate to your own thoughts and reactions, you gain access to something available to you right now, in this exact moment, regardless of what is currently happening in your external life. One of the most practical starting points for building this internal peace involves changing your relationship with your own thoughts, particularly the anxious or critical ones that arrive uninvited throughout the day. Most people treat every thought that enters their mind as an urgent truth requiring immediate reaction. A worried thought about the future triggers immediate anxiety. A critical thought about yourself triggers immediate shame. But thoughts are not commands, and they are not always accurate reflections of reality. Learning to notice a thought without immediately believing or reacting to it is one of the most powerful skills available for cultivating lasting inner peace. When an anxious thought arrives, instead of spiraling into its story completely, practice simply noticing it. This is a worried thought, and it does not necessarily reflect what will actually happen. This small shift creates space between you and the thought, and that space is exactly where peace begins to take root. Another important practice involves accepting what cannot be controlled, rather than exhausting your energy fighting against it. So much daily stress comes from resisting things that have already happened or things entirely outside your influence, other people's opinions, unexpected delays, decisions made by someone else that affect your plans. Fighting against reality that has already occurred does not change the reality. It simply adds a second layer of suffering on top of the original difficulty, the suffering of wishing things were different, combined with the original problem itself. Practicing acceptance does not mean passivity or giving up on improving your circumstances where improvement is genuinely possible. It means directing your energy toward what you can actually influence, your response, your next action, your effort moving forward, rather than wasting that energy resisting what has already happened or what remains entirely outside your control. Silence and stillness deserve specific attention here as well, because modern life is remarkably effective at filling every quiet moment with noise, distraction, and stimulation. Notifications, background entertainment, constant scrolling, all of it keeps the mind perpetually occupied, rarely given the chance to settle into genuine quiet. But peace requires quiet the way a plant requires water. Without regular moments of stillness, the mind never gets the opportunity to process, settle, and recover from the constant input it receives throughout the day. Building even 10 or 15 minutes of genuine stillness into your daily routine, without a phone, without background noise, simply sitting with your own thoughts and breath, creates a foundation that supports calm behavior throughout the rest of your day. Physical practices matter here too, connecting back to ideas explored in earlier chapters regarding breath and body. Slow, deliberate breathing activates a physical calming response in the body, regardless of what is happening mentally or emotionally. Practicing this daily, even during ordinary moments when nothing particularly stressful is happening, trains your body to access calm more easily when genuine stress does arrive. This is similar to how physical strength is built gradually through consistent training rather than appearing suddenly the one time you need it most. Peace under pressure is built the same way, through consistent practice during calm moments, so that the skill is already present and available when pressure eventually arrives. There is also a deeper layer to inner peace that goes beyond technique, rooted in how you define your own worth and identity. If your sense of self depends heavily on external outcomes, achievements, or the opinions of others, peace will always remain fragile, vulnerable to collapse the moment any of those external factors shift unfavorably. But if your sense of self is rooted in something steadier, your values, your effort, your integrity in how you treat others and handle difficulty, external circumstances lose much of their power to disturb your internal calm. This connects directly to earlier chapters in this book, because releasing the need for external validation, building character in private moments, and developing genuine confidence through consistent action all feed directly into this deeper form of peace. Each principle in this book supports the others, building toward a person who is steady, not because life is easy, but because their internal foundation no longer depends on life being easy in the first place. The quiet authority this chapter's title describes is not something you can fake or perform temporarily during important moments. It emerges naturally, almost as a byproduct, from someone who has genuinely done the internal work of cultivating peace over time. People sense this authority not because it announces itself, but because it is simply present, steady beneath the surface, unaffected by minor disruptions that would rattle someone whose calm is only skin deep. This is available to anyone willing to do the quiet, unglamorous work of building peace from the inside. One calm breath, one accepted difficulty, one moment of stillness at a time, until eventually that peace becomes not something you have to practice deliberately, but simply who you have become. Chapter 10. Sustain lifelong growth by choosing substance over image. Every journey through a book like this eventually arrives at the same essential question: what happens after the final page, once the ideas have been read, but the real work of living them still remains ahead? This is where most personal growth quietly fails, not because the ideas were wrong, but because they were never carried past the moment of inspiration into the much longer process of daily practice. This final chapter is not about learning something new. It is about understanding how to make everything discussed so far last for the rest of your life, rather than fading within a few weeks like so many good intentions before it. There are two paths available to anyone pursuing personal growth, and understanding the difference between them is essential to sustaining change over time. The first path is built around image, around appearing to have grown, appearing disciplined, appearing wise, appearing successful. This path is tempting because it produces fast results. You can adjust your image quickly, change how you present yourself online, speak differently in conversations, or adopt the language of growth without actually doing the slower internal work underneath it. The second path is built around substance, around actually becoming disciplined, actually developing wisdom through experience, actually building the internal character discussed throughout every chapter of this book. This path is slower, often invisible to others for a long time, and it rarely offers the quick validation that the image-focused path provides. But it is the only path that produces something that lasts. The danger of choosing image over substance is that it eventually collapses under pressure. A person who has built an impressive image without matching internal substance can maintain that image only as long as circumstances remain easy. The moment real difficulty arrives, a serious setback, a public failure, a relationship tested by hardship, the gap between the image and the reality becomes impossible to hide. This is precisely why some people who appear enormously successful and put together on the surface fall apart dramatically when life applies real pressure. Their foundation was built on appearance rather than genuine internal strength, and appearance simply cannot hold weight the way substance can. Choosing substance instead means accepting a slower, quieter path toward growth, one where progress often goes unnoticed by others for a long time, sometimes for years. This requires a particular kind of patience that runs against the culture of instant results and quick transformation often promised by superficial approaches to self-improvement. But this patience is exactly what allows growth to become permanent rather than temporary. Think back to the earlier chapter, on building unshakable confidence through small, consistent actions. That entire principle depends on choosing substance over image, choosing the boring, repeated action over the exciting, visible announcement of change. This same principle applies to sustaining growth across an entire lifetime, not just within a single habit or a single chapter of your life. One of the most important practices for sustaining substance-based growth is regularly returning to honest self-reflection, rather than assuming that growth, once achieved, remains permanent without maintenance. Character, discipline, and inner peace are not destinations you arrive at once and then keep forever automatically. They are ongoing practices that require continued attention, much like physical fitness requires continued effort even after an initial goal has been reached. Set aside regular time, whether weekly or monthly, to honestly examine where you have been consistent and where you have started slipping back into old patterns. This is not about harsh self-criticism. It is about honest awareness, which is always the necessary first step toward any meaningful correction. Another essential practice involves protecting yourself from the temptation to compare your substance-based journey to other people's image-based presentation of their own lives. This has become significantly harder in a world filled with curated online presentations of success, discipline, and happiness. Remember that what you see from others is almost always an edited highlight, not the full private reality of their internal life. Comparing your honest, sometimes messy internal progress to someone else's polished external image is comparing two entirely different things, and it will only distort your sense of how you are actually doing. Measure your growth against your own past self, not against someone else's curated presentation. It is also worth acknowledging directly that choosing substance over image does not mean external results never matter at all. Achievements, recognition, and success are not inherently bad, and there is nothing wrong with enjoying them when they arrive naturally as a result of genuine effort and growth. The distinction this book has emphasized throughout is not between success and failure, but between success built as the natural result of substance and image built as a substitute for substance that was never actually developed. When success arrives after real internal growth, it tends to feel stable and earned. When image is built without matching substance underneath it, success, if it arrives at all, tends to feel hollow, anxious, and constantly at risk of being exposed as less real than it appears. As you move forward from this book into the actual practice of your daily life, remember that every chapter you have read connects into a single, unified way of moving through the world. Releasing the need for external validation frees you to build confidence through quiet, consistent action. That confidence supports your ability to listen deeply rather than rushing to speak. Deep listening builds a calm, grounded presence that commands respect without demanding attention. That presence is strengthened further by the character you build in private moments when no one else is watching. Strong character allows you to build genuine connections instead of chasing empty impressions. Genuine connection strengthens your ability to lead through calm action rather than loud reaction. Calm leadership is sustained by inner peace, cultivated deliberately rather than waiting for external circumstances to provide it. And all of this together forms the substance that must be chosen again and again over the tempting shortcut of image for the rest of your life. This is not a destination you reach and then complete forever. It is a daily choice, renewed each morning, tested in small moments most people never notice, built slowly through years rather than achieved suddenly through a single transformation. There will be days you choose image without realizing it, days you seek approval instead of building quiet confidence, days you react loudly instead of responding calmly. This does not undo the progress you have made. It simply means returning again to the practice, the same way you would return to any skill worth mastering over a lifetime. The invisible authority this book has described from its opening pages was never about becoming someone impressive to others. It was always about becoming someone solid to yourself, someone whose worth does not depend on being seen, whose strength does not depend on being loud, and whose respect from others is simply the natural result of a life built consistently, honestly, and quietly, one true choice at a time, for as long as you continue choosing it.